Turn and like to build up your Uber Eats, it's like you're building it. It just everything was not worth it.
Yeah, I do feel very like I don't order Uber Eats very often at all, but when I do, I feel like a little guilty, I guess. For sure. Yeah. Okay. So I think everyone is.
Oh, wow, everyone's here.
Yeah, there might be one person, but I'm sure everyone's gotten the link. So yeah, can start. Yay, Vancouver! I'm so excited that this is happening. Yeah, so hi everybody. I know some of you, not all of you. So the people I don't know, my name is Mariko Tajiri, and this is Nick Olivero. And you have a beautiful, this is the saga of your kitchen renovations, right? Mine is a saga of like, did I forget to change my calendar or not? Like what is a weekend anymore and what is a month anymore is the kind of question.
That's a good point. Very good point.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks everyone for being here and spending your Tuesday nights with us. Yeah, I guess you need a coffee. It's like 10 p.m. for us in Toronto, and you just did a Bordeaux tasting, right?
I did. I just did a Bordeaux tasting with Rachel Picard, whose brother is on the chat, and it was great. But I was like, I have a peppermint tea, and just I'm actually had a nap today, so I'm actually fine. I just
really nice.
wanted to be a little fancier for the East Coasters, West Coasters.
West Coasters, yeah. Yeah, so this is the first time we're doing Hakko Gakko for the Vancouver people, which could not have happened with Michiro and packing these little pouches with all the pictures on them and getting them to people and all the restaurants that helped us to be pickup points. And Nick, who's, you like pushed me to do, not push, but you like suggested things, which made it happen. Oh.
Yeah, you just got to do it.
Because I think Andrea and Yash were the two people who were like, when's this happening in Vancouver? When? So yeah, you guys also made it happen. So thank you. Hakko Gakko is this. It's kind of cut off here. I'll show you the logo later if you want to see. It means School of Fermentation, and it's my kind of take, I guess, or after nearly 15 years of talking and drinking sake, I thought, I wanted to present something that was of the moment, right? Sake is changing so quickly. Every time I see a brewer, they're saying something different. So I wanted to convey that part, but also like where we came from, where we're going, and where we're at right now. Yeah. So it's meant to be, light and easy. It's Tuesday night, 7 p.m. in Vancouver. Like I think Nick was saying, if you're having dinner, please continue to do so. If you need to go to the bathroom, like don't raise your hand or anything. And yeah, drink sake if you like. But I will get to the tasting part where it is towards the end. So you can leave your sakes in the fridge. You can take them out now if you want, but you can keep them in the fridge as well. I'm gonna give you like a minute or something to get them out. You can get your wine glasses out, your chocolates. I saw some very nice like vintage glasses that someone was using last night. So yeah, you can get anything out. Jonathan in Toronto introduced, Jonathan, like left sign, I think. Yeah, wow. It's just such a nice community of people, Okay. So let's get started. It is being recorded, and I will eventually figure out how to put things on YouTube, and you can take a look at it later if you want some entertainment for your Saturday night or any other time. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, and you should introduce yourself, Nick, because...
Oh, sorry, yeah. My name's Nick. I'm a som wine professional in Toronto, and I've been lucky enough to weasel my way into Hakko Gakko as a co-host, which is great. I've learned so much, and this is literally our third Hakko Gakko that we're starting, and I'm so super excited. And like, for me, sake was something that was always on my mind to learn and want to like sell and talk about more. And it was just so intimidating. So this, even after the first session, like the change in my confidence in dealing and selling and buying sake has completely changed. And I'm so confident that that it will for you as well. And, you know, I wine is my background, and I will, you know, occasionally chime in to like, if there are wine people out there, to like help contextualize it a little bit, because I think that's also important, especially for guests who have a curiosity in wine but have never tried a sake. Having the tools to like communicate that is something that I deal with every day, and it's really something I'm still learning. And I want to share that kind of my process as someone who knew little to nothing about sake to knowing that much more about sake.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, Nick keeps me on track and asks questions to like contextualize things, and also like, you know, it's much better when I get to talk, like have a conversation. I think Jing was like, yeah, you know, it's conversational but thorough, and that's hopefully that what you know what you're going to experience as well, right? So please ask questions in the chat box and DM me anytime. But yeah, let's screen share again. Okay, here we go. Yeah, this is this logo that my amazing partner conjured up for me one day. It might have been after a bottle of wine or two, but it's very, very fun. It's Hakko Gakko, the characters mean, again, School of Fermentation. And we hope to make like, what is it? Jackets and what is that called when you have to wear clothes for school?
A uniform.
Thank you. this is off to a good start when I get, yeah, I'm gonna make Hakko Gakko uniform, but I can't remember the word. Maybe not. Okay. So day one. Welcome to day one to class. Uniforms. Oh, never gonna forget that word now.
That's
yeah. So why are we here, right? Everyone here hopefully has a keen interest in sake, but like Nick was saying, there's so many bottles out there in Vancouver. There is a huge array of sake selection, and there's always been private liquor shops in BC. So you know you've got a really great access to lots of different sake, and I think sometimes that's good when it's also really difficult. You know, like whether it's Pigeon or Burdock or Yuwa or Dachi, like they have such a great list of sake, but sometimes it can be hard if you're not like talking to the som all the time or this sake person, and maybe you don't, you know, they're not at the table at that moment. So the goal here, like Nick, you were saying, is to make sure that everyone can be like, okay, I think I like this sake or this style, and be able to pick up a bottle and actually purchase it, take it home, or drink it at the restaurant. What's so special about sake? I want to go through some of the brewing basics. Today, day one is always the longest, I'd say. And it's the one where there's a lot of content and info. There's no tests, so don't get like nervous about it. Obviously, you shouldn't. It's meant to be fun and with alcohol at the end of the day. But there's classic styles that we're going to talk about. We got 4 sakes for tonight that are really great classic examples of the different categories, and one that is a little bit different and a little more modern in style. Right? How to taste, I think, is a big question. You know, it's a little intimidating when you're tasting anything in front of people, but especially for those of you who are not in the industry, I think tasting as a whole concept can be a little bit foreign. So we'll do that all together and talk about what we're looking for. And at the end of the day, it's about what you want to drink, what you like, right? So what I like might not be what you like, and vice versa. The goals for this class or for these 4 sessions is to make you excited, to make you confused, to make you curious. I always, a lot of questions the answer becomes like, it depends. And I know that can be frustrating sometimes. It is for me, even when I ask brewers or like sake instructors, other people. But hopefully, again, you get more curious, you ask more questions, you Google them and go to websites. Sake websites are like, okay, aren't they? Some of them are good, some of them are really not good. And there's everything in between. But the biggest reason why I wanted to do Hakko Gakko was that Debbie said I've taught quite a few times. Debbie said teaches sake now in I think like 70 countries around the world, which is pretty amazing because there's some countries that I didn't think made much sense business wise, but there's like African countries teaching sake, and that's really exciting. But what I thought was kind of missing and what I wanted to fill was talking about sakes and people and the stories as to why something tastes a certain way or the historical context. And also because brewers are challenging themselves and doing so many new things, there's not a lot of access to that information unless you're like, first of all, Japanese. Maybe you read a lot of Japanese magazines or you follow them on Instagram, but it's really hard to get that information unless you're doing that and you're reading Japanese. So that's what I wanted to do with this class, or attempt to start to do. Yeah. This is a photo of Kirakucho, which is a really gorgeous brewery. And for just as an example, the sixth generation, Mayuko-san, she is young. It's a woman who is not, that is not common in the sake breweries. We're still really excited when a winemaker is female, which is, good and bad, right? Like there's just not that many. And in sake, it's even more fewer. And hopefully with people like Mayuko-san, we're going to start to see more people who are from different backgrounds. There's a British Toji, Philip Harper, and he's the only Toji in all of Japan who is not Japanese. So lots of room to improve. Like I was saying, I think a lot of you or all of you probably have drank sake to some degree, but what is it exactly? There's a lot of terminology out there, and rice wine is a term that I really don't like, but I don't think I've met all of you here, but I think I might have said this to certain people over the years. This is, I think it's a term that was helpful, and just don't like it anymore because it's not just me, but it isn't made like wine, right? In fact, it's actually brewed much closer to beer, but it finishes like wine, and we use wine glasses and talk about some of the flavor profiles that exist in wine as well. So you do kind of see that comparison. But yeah, like after what, three classes, or a lot of classes actually, Nick, it's much more beer friendly as a terminology and concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, you understand that like it is very similar the process to beer, but I also I understand, I like that finishes like wine because there is this like level of detail that like the sake producers that will taste that, like, I don't know, it does feel like wine, like everything is a choice. And maybe I don't know enough brewers and brewery, but the ones I do know are just like, there's a certain level of casualness. Sake doesn't seem very casual to me. Just the intensity that they express in every single step of the process is mind-blowing to me.
That's a interesting thought. Yeah, sake is not casual. Yeah, that's true. And everything is a choice. It is produced, like it's manufactured. There are people who are much more hands off, or they're very low intervention, but it is by design. Like you do get various levels of naturalness, but yeah, it's by design. They're not easygoing people. That's true. Yeah. That's a good.
There's also like a beer, essentially, perhaps if you threw some grain in some water, you would get some kind of lightly alcoholic product.
Sure.
You just can't do that with rice. You can't just throw it in water. Like the fact that someone had to create this process is so fascinating.
Yeah, and in times when people didn't know much about like temperature, and fermentation and yeast and like why things ferment, right? Yeah, it's pretty wild. And it's the beer geeks, I think, usually that think, okay, I'm gonna try making sake now. And oh, the other thing is, sake. We'll talk more about what a typical sake is later, but becomes like 14-15% alcohol easily, and that is not a beer alcoholic level, right? Alcohol level, and it is actually much higher than wine as well. So this picture, I think it's not my hand, actually, it's not my thumb. This is sake rice in the picture, and everything we're going to taste is from this kind of grain, and all these melon, apple, pear, all these notes that we're going to talk about are coming from just rice, water, and koji. I think it's pretty fascinating. What's a typical sake? I think everyone's had some version of a typical sake, and that can be another kind of word or euphemism, perhaps, for like a table sake, right? Like an average sake that probably isn't isn't bad tasting, but maybe isn't the most memorable experience you'll ever have. And in that regard, the color is going to be like clearish. It might have a little bit of pale greenness. The aromas would be maybe kind of fruity, maybe a little cereal lactic. Cereal being like ricey, is steamed rice, porridge, all these things that we write down in some of these tasting notes. It also depends on like what you grew up with, right? I never had porridge. That came up in like the Three Bears, the story of the three Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So outside of that, I have no idea what porridge smells like. It's kind of like oatmeal, I imagine.
It's oatmeal. It's just oatmeal.
Yeah. So oatmeal. So you smell oatmeal.
We don't call it in England, like in Australia, we call it porridge.
Oh, really?
I think it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
You cook it with milk, though.
Okay. Yeah. Like I guess W said being.
I'll make you some porridge.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like I'd like this much of it. I'm like, thank you. I'll just have rice now.
That's fair.
And on the palate, we get something that is slightly sweet, lightly acidic, and around this kind of alcohol level, right? 15 to 17, which is higher than wine, higher than beer, because wine yeast would not make it to that alcohol percentage. It would get killed off at that high number. But with sake, you can get up to like 22, 23 pretty easily. And it's because of the process that sake is made that it goes up gradually, and then the alcohol is still able to get to that level. And this picture here, this is from, I think, from Hakkaisan actually, and it's their sushi, it's their table sake genshu, and the alcohol in this was, I think it was closest to like 21 degrees Celsius, not Celsius, 21 degrees percent alcohol. There we go, ABV. And that's again, like, it's reasonable. The sake yeast are really strong, and then we watered that down to get it to a more palatable percentage point. And how did it evolve? A lot of cultures around the world, a lot of civilizations came to alcohol in a kind of a similar way, and that's to speak or communicate with the gods, higher beings. And sake specifically, I read, was apparently if you were drunk, that state of being drunk allowed you to communicate with higher powers, right? So when next time you get drunk, you can just say, it's part of my meditation process or part of my spiritual practice. Anyone? Well, I forgot I'm talking to a Vancouver crowd, so that might be like not quite. I don't know. Is that what everyone's doing in BC? Maybe that makes sense, right? Everyone's meditating. Okay, ingredients. These are the ingredients that are going to be on the back of every bottle of sake on the label. Rice, koji, water, That's always going to be on the labels. There's some optional ingredients on the back, but for the most part, it is these are the ingredients you're going to see. Yeast, it's in this like middle portion here, but yeast is often not like pointed out. It's not spelled out because it can occur naturally. And the same thing as wine, right? If you look at the ingredient list in wine, it often says just grapes and water. But the yeast is assumed to be able to exist naturally, and that's why we don't put yeast on the sake bottles either. Koji yeast, we'll talk more, like a lot more about it later. But for now, if we're starting with rice, sake specific rice and table rice are two different things. They're both from the Japonica family, and it's short grained, it's not sticky, but there are two different varieties that we can use for sake rice. And then from there, it gets broken down into way more types and places that the sake rice or the table rice is from. Sake specific rice, there's more than 100 types that are still being used, not still being used, that are being used now. And every, probably not month, but like every year, there's quite a few new rice varieties that are being born. Right? So if you go to Japan and you go to a grocery store and buy like a $20 strawberry, that could be a different strawberry from one part of Tochigi Prefecture, and that's kind of the like singularity that Japanese culture and society really focuses on, right? There's like jazz bars that only have one era of jazz, or like just saxophone, just the 30s. Yeah, just French saxophone jazz from the 30s. That sort of thing. So it makes sense that this like very nerdy, very geeky, focus exists. Graded rice, so rice does get graded in terms of the size, in terms of weight. So some years are really hard on farmers, the same way that it is for grape farmers, grape growers, and they have years where they can't get this like Grand Cru status for their rice. Different characteristics, again, this we'll talk about further, but there are characteristics that make specifically sake rice good for making sake with, but it doesn't have to be that way. But we'll talk about why the price is just so different when you're talking about table rice that you're getting at TNT or wherever else you get your rice versus sake specific rice. And water, this is a really, really big part of sake making. And of course, it is for wine or for beer as well. But with sake, there's like very little to hide, right? To hide behind, there's your rice, and then there's your water, and then there's your yeast, and that's your koji, sorry. So yeah, it's a huge part of it, and it really can dictate your fermentation. It also affects the texture. It affects a lot of things with sake. So it is very, very important to talk about. I think Nick, you said that there's a lot of websites that have like a well in the
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot
In
of
this, even in this slideshow, there'll be a few shots of wells, and
yeah, there's at least
I
two.
asked whether that was the real water source, where they just like put little buckets in.
Yeah, it looks like a prop. Yeah, where like this is where they got. Yeah, but it is. They do use them, but that's not the only source. So poetic water, I call it that because a lot of sake breweries will tell you just how beautiful, just how amazing their water is. And this picture is oddly upside down on the right, but this is the water source for Hakkai-san Brewery in Niigata, and it kind of comes down in this. Like what is that, a lightning shape, and so they call this is like Raiden Sama, which means the god of lightning, right? And there's a lot of like mythology around this water source and the sake that they make with this water. Spring water is a huge another source as well, and so spring water, well water are the two big water sources that we talk about. It is lovely to talk about these places naturally occurring sources, but the reality is also that we can make sake with any clean water. There are certain things like heavy metals that of course get in the way of fermentation, but outside of that, you can use a lot of different water. Yeah. And like, you can add I don't think there's any coffee people this time, but you can add a tablet to your water and make coffee water, right? Like if you enter barista competitions, you can make coffee water by adding a tablet to distilled water. And you could do that for sake as well. Especially at the big producers, I think there's a lot of like filtration going on. Two wells. I got a two well.
The next slide.
The next slide is two wells. Okay, so the one on the left, this guy who looks very happy, this is Matsumoto-san. This is Hide from Shihari. So I know, I think Tyler's on this call, and we're doing the ID series tasting tomorrow in Vancouver. So this
that sounds so cool.
Yeah. This is
I was so jealous. I was like, oh, what? And then I was like, nope, I'm in the wrong.
Starts at 11. I mean, I know you're a night owl, so you can probably stay up for it.
13. Are you having the 13-14? Because that's my favorite.
Yeah, that one was really good, wasn't it? I just actually had a little splash of one of the sakes that I had from the time I tasted with you, like a month ago, more than, right? And it was quite different, but really good still. Just strange, but in a good way. This is so this is his well in Fushimi in Kyoto, and the water is very soft there. Like notably, if you've ever heard like Nada versus Fushimi, Nada is in Hyogo, and that's or it's basically Kobe, and the water is harder, whereas Fushimi, where this is in Kyoto, is really soft water. And that's why Gekkeikan is here, Matsumoto is here, and a lot of other big breweries made their fortune, I guess, or history at this place because of the water. It's a huge part of it. It's also really close to, it's like a stone's throw away from Uji, which is where like some great matcha comes from. Yeah, but where there's great water and often soft water, there's a big culture around tea, dashi, like Taiwan, with their tea industry. That's a huge influence as to why it's there. And then on the right, kind of to counter that, this is in Ishikawa. This is the 100-year water. And Ishikawa is on the Sea Japan side, a lot more minerality in the water. And this is Miki, who's hosting the tasting tomorrow for the ID series. She's one of the owners for Dachi. And then I think over here is Yuri, whose daughter Miho is going to be listening later. So this is our photo of the well at Fukumitsuya. They make kagatobi and things like that. But it said that the water takes 100 years to get to this brewery through Mount Hakusan. And in those 100 years, probably ish, it gets filtered, and it also picks up a lot of minerals along the way, and the water is harder than normal. So in Japan, you get about 60 milligrams per liter for hardness, and that's pretty soft. Like I think Toronto's well over 150, maybe close to 200. Vancouver's quite soft, as you can imagine. Again, kind of hence maybe the coffee culture there. But in Ishikawa, in where we are over here in the 100-year water, it's getting close to 120. And in Japan, that's considered quite hard. Shimi would be like lower than like 30 for sure. What is it like in Australia? Is it pretty hard water?
Yeah, mostly hard water. But because we mostly get our water from under the ground.
Okay, so the well waters are like picked under, well, not wells, right? Like
yeah, because
okay.
Yeah, that's where we get a lot of our water. But that's all.
Well, harder water often like tastes better technically, like it quenches your thirst more, which is why here at Fukumitsu you're like, oh, that tastes really good. And then you go to Fushimi and the water is like more textured, less sharp, and then it doesn't feel as, like you don't feel quenched. Yeah, there's quenched.
That's so interesting.
We got to throw water next time into the tasting because that's fun to taste the difference. When brewers
that would be really cool.
When brewers are coming to Canada, I used to bring them to Sean's shop, to the coffee shop, and make them blind taste his waters. because there's like coffee brewing water and like pour over.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I wasn't like tricking them. But if you taste the tap water, especially Toronto tap water, right, versus the coffee brewing water, so different. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
Vancouver is very lucky that way that everything tastes good there. Like the ice in Vancouver, like just like ice machine is pretty amazing.
I haven't been. I need to go now.
Yeah,
Just for the water.
just for the water.
I just want to taste this water.
It is very, yeah, very spoiled in I was very spoiled in Vancouver when I lived there. So let's talk rice. This is a photo of Mitobe-san, Yamagata Masamune, which we're not having today, but we're having next week. And Yamagata, actually, sake, which sake is the sake number 3 is Gasan, and that's from Yamagata Prefecture as well. But this is a rice field that Mitobe-san actually grows on his own and like owns. So it's kind of this like domain project for him, but that's quite rare, and we'll talk more about that later. Japonica rice, short grain Japanese Japonica rice. And within that, again, there's table rice and sake specific rice. Over 100 varieties of sake specific rice are available to use, but I'm sure some of you have heard terms like Yamada Nishiki, Omachi. I think Rachel's favorite, because I'm going to tell you because Simon's listening, right? But Rachel's favorite is Omachi, right?
Yeah, she's a machist.
Yeah.
Through and through.
She's an omachist. Yeah, so
Self-identified.
yeah, she should have a sticker. Hello, my name is Rachel, and I am an omachist. But there's 5 varieties that make up over 50% of the production. So those are the really popular ones to use. But there's like over 95 more that you can also choose from. And the majority of sake, so the vast majority of the volume of sake made is from table rice. So you can use what you have at home to make dinner with to make perfectly good sake. There's other things besides just having rice, but that you can make it from that as well. Okay. Farming, this is, I think, something that a lot of people are interested in, especially with when we talk about like where does your fruit come from? Not just with wine, but where we want to know where our food comes from, where things in general, I think, come from. But for the most part, farmers around Japan, they grow rice and then they sell it to the co-ops that are run by the government, and that's the way it's been done since at least after World War II. Before that, we're talking like there's a feudal system that was, I was going to say thriving, not quite thriving for the farmers maybe, but that was the main system for a long time. But after World War II, the government decided that they wanted to control rice production to try to make sure that everyone had enough rice to eat and not let corporations run them. He said. But now that's changing quite a bit, where we see farmers work directly with brewers, or the breweries run farms or grow rice themselves. Again, that's still really, really uncommon. So this picture, Mitobe-san, Yamagata Masamune, he is the only rice grower that he knows of that grows strictly sake rice. So everyone else grows like a mix of table rice, sake rice, probably other crops as well. But he's the only one, because he's a brewer, makes sense, that grows only sake rice. Okay. Wet rice farming, so the flooded fields, that is the main method. There's some kind of experiments around dry farming, but it is for the most part wet rice farming, and the paddies that you see that came from China back in the day. Organic farming is a really big question, I know, but for the most part right now, it's not being done in a big way. There are things about the shimpaku, which we talk about, and what we're looking for with sake specific rice that make organic farming quite difficult. But it is something that a lot of brewers in our kind of age group, in their 30s, 40s, maybe like 50s, are starting to ask, like, why not? Why can't we do this, right? Yeah. Terroir, tomorrow's tasting with the ID series is a really good example of how the sake makers and even like the people drinking the sake, they're starting to ask questions about terroir and what that means, right? And like week 3 is more about this and like yeast types, where these yeasts come from, where these sakes come from, and what it means to be Yamagata sake. But it's all really like it's not as clean maybe as the wine world yet, where we have a lot of AOCs and things to govern that thought process. Why sake rice? So this is a big question, right? So why sake rice? Why is sake rice expensive? Why is it hard to grow? And what makes it sake specific rice? And some of the things we're going to talk about is the shimpaku, whether that rice has it or not, the size of the grain, how big each of the grains are, literally. I was talking to a Japanese food supplier today, and he said, I asked him for some Japanese rice because we were talking about it, Nick. And he's like, yeah, I have this really nice, very expensive rice, and the grains are just so big. You got to see it. We're very excited to try. I think it's like $100 a bag wholesale. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, I guess we could split
Is
that.
it a big bag or is it a
Yeah,
little
it's
bag?
like, I think it's 10 kilos, which is pretty big, right?
That's a lot.
Yeah, but he said
Let's just
that.
split it up.
Yeah, I think Shoshin and like some of these like really expensive sushi restaurants, they use that. I'm like, oh, makes sense. That's yeah, that'd be fun to do a rice tasting with that, right?
Yeah,
Like 3
that'd be
different,
really fun.
and then you cook it all the same. Yeah, that'd be great. Or make onigiri with it.
I made onigiri tonight. It was delicious.
Oh, really? Yeah, you can make so much like yummy flavors with onigiri. How easy is it to work with? That's a big question. Some rice varieties like omachi, which I love too, but omachi rice is a lot harder to work with. Like you can't control it as much. The results can be a little less like planned, which is why some brewers don't love working with it. They want that reliability. They want to make sure they know what's going to happen. Besides how it comes out, like there's also questions about polishing. How can we polish this rice over that rice? Maybe it cracks faster, maybe it's too small. These are really a lot of questions in there. How it dissolves, of course, is there too. Dissolving, I mean like fermentation. It doesn't just melt away, but into your tanks. Okay. Okay, so shinpaku. This is, I think, one of the first things that people talk about when they first started researching about sake. It comes up in like websites. It comes up in a lot of readings what the shinpaku is and polishing surrounding it. Shinpaku, the characters there for those of you who are interested, mean the first character is for heart, and then the second character is for white. So I don't know, I just call it the white heart. But if you look at this close up of this rice picture, it looks like little teeth there. And then inside it, there's an opaque part that is a little darker, and that's the shinpaku. We're talking about that part when we talk about shinpaku, and that's where the highest concentration of starch is, right? It's not that there isn't starch in other places, but that's where it's concentrated, and that's why when you put it under the microscope you can see it this way. Rice polish, RP, RPR, you might hear both terms, is one way to categorize sake. 50%, 30%, 60%, all these numbers, they're not alcohol levels, right? They are for the amount of polish that the rice has gone through. And it's one way to categorize sake, but not the only way. But it's not so long ago that I used to see menus where they were like putting sake strictly in terms of polishing numbers, and now that's not so common because, like we're going to find out a little later on, there's a lot that can happen between a 50% polished junmai versus a 50% junmai daiginjo, and technically the numbers are the same, but completely different sakes. The outside layers contain more fats, proteins, lipid, vitamins. This all works out to be nutrients, and we need these nutrients, not necessarily for our health because we're not consuming it in that way, but for the fermentation itself. So if you look at this picture, the brown rice, the brown is where all the nutrients are, right? So if you eat brown rice, it's supposed to be healthier, it's less processed as well. But for sake making as well, if you have too much of this, then your fermentation is going to be really fast, maybe a little aggressive and hard to manage. And but by polishing it, you can have more reliable results and make a specific style of sake. I think a lot of people have seen pictures like this, right? If you go to like Legacy Liquor Store in Olympic Village in Vancouver, I think at one point, maybe not anymore, they had like a Dasai rice polishing packs on the wall or by the sake fridge, and you can see this is 50 at the time, 39, 23, and you see the grains get smaller, like my slide here. Yeah. Okay, so polishing ratio. I'm sure a lot of you have seen some version of this, but to go over it again, 100% brown rice, you can see that it is brown because you have the nutrients, it's the closest to the shell and to the bran. And then as we go down, we get to a smaller size. And then you also see that the ratio, like the amount of the shinpaku is more when we compare it to the overall size. So very little of the rice at the 50% is not shinpaku, right? We only see like a very, very little sliver of it. If you go to, I know, so YK3 is a sake brewery in Richmond in Vancouver, and they just announced that they had to give up their lease because the rent's going up so much. I think it's like 3 times. So that brewery is no longer at that brewery at that location. But when I used to go visit, you could see when they showed you their sake rice, if they use sake rice for some of their brews, you could see that it was very different in there. And the polishing ratio, so seimai buai is always about what is remaining, right? So 60% means 60% is remaining, not what was polished away. Which brewery? No, so Granville Island is still there. Granville Island Brewery or Osake Artisan Sake is still there, but YK3, which was in Richmond, kind of like number 6 road. I think it's been a while since I lived in Vancouver, but they they are thinking about trying to move to Vancouver Island, I think. But Nancy in Toronto did a story about that a little while ago. Yeah, so well, I'm sure they'll find their way. Yeah. So 60% or less, 30%, 20%, that is what is left over, not what is polished off. So don't mix that up. You have to assume that it is about what's left over. The minimum requirements. If you ever do like a sake class, every, I feel like certification likes to say this, it likes to ask this question in order to trip you up. And it goes, okay, so what kind of sake can you make with 90% polish? And you're like, oh yeah, well, junmai, right? And then you go, no, it can also be futsushu. So futsushu is table sake. Futsu means regular or normal. Like apparently it's like a modern thing to say. My mom hates it, but if you ask your kid like, how was your day, and they say futsu, it's like a regular day, or futsu ni oishii means like it's regularly tasty, which apparently means it's very good. But futsu meaning regular and shu meaning sake is another way to say sake. So 100% rice, so meaning brown rice, or 90% or any of those polishes, if there is no added alcohol, which we'll cover, it can be futsushu and junmai. 70% honjozo, junmai, around there. 60-50, these are really kind of important numbers for most sakes. Right? So the first 3 sakes we taste tonight are things that are kind of classically, categorically, typically in these lines in this grid, so that we can taste what they should taste like. Polishing machines look kind of like this on the right, the big picture there. It's a pretty big industrial machine. You don't, most places, most breweries do not own equipment like this. This is Hakkai-san. So sake number one is Hakkai-san Brewery in Niigata, 8 Peaks. And they have quite a few polishing machines. That's a pretty, yeah, that's a fairly large brewery, and that's why they have it. And inside each of these machines is this polishing stone that turns, and every time the sake rice or the regular rice falls past it, it polishes it. So if you sharpen your knife, what else? Like if you've seen like a flour mill, it would be some kind of similar kind of technology around it. But this machine became really commercially accessible only with only recently. So in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it was around, but you couldn't access it, right? So it's only really recently that it's still expensive, but $250,000 is reachable, right? So like Matsumoto Hide, he installed a few of these before he had a family feud and had to leave. But his legacy remains at the brewery, these huge polishing machines. Apparently one of the reasons why the family was upset, his big purchases. He didn't buy a fancy car, he just bought really expensive polishing machines. Is polishing a more modern step since industrialization? Yeah, so definitely a modern thing. Back before these were commercially viable, you would have not had like polished sake rice. And also keep in mind that this like ginjo, daiginjo, this categorization system is only from the late mid 90s actually. So my mom was drinking sake that was like just arbitrarily called very good sake, or like level 2, level 1. Oh. So it's a very modern invention, this categorization in the first place. Okay. So if you, as a brewery, most places don't own these. You would get the rice polished and then, brought to your brewery. So I think YK3 would have had a lot of junmais. Not, oh yeah, they did make a ginjo as well. I think Masa on Granville Island, he doesn't use super polished rice, but yeah, I don't think he's polishing it himself. Oh, maybe he does. I think he had like a home polishing machine you can get. Yeah. So what's so hard about brewing sake? I experienced this firsthand when years ago I bought a sake making kit. Did I ever tell you, Nick? I bought a sake making kit from this like microbiologist professor at UBC from Japan, and he loves sake, and he put together these kits where you can make 4 liters of sake. It's kind of like you brew kits, right? Mm-hmm. And so I tried to make it, and I think Michihiro, who's here too, helped me. And everything was just like not right. Like the temperature control, that was a huge part of it. And we did it at the office, and it started to smell kind of strange. And then of course our boss was like, "What is this?" and made fun of us for many years. But it is extremely difficult to get this precision, because again we keep going back to the fact that it's rice, it's water, it's koji. That's it, right? There with winemaking, of course, it's not easy either. But if you make sugar, if you have sugar, you can ferment that, right? Like you've got your sugars already. So that part is taken care of. But with sake, where does the sugar come from? So sake rice, or rice in general, if you cook it, if you like stomp on it, no matter what you do to it, you're not going to get accessible sugars right away. What you have is starch, right? So whether you're eating potatoes or rice or porridge or oatmeal, you don't have sugars yet, you have starch. And in order to get the yeast working on the sugars, to feed on the sugars, we need to create them first. And that's where koji comes in. And koji, sometimes I think it gets mixed up with this concept of yeast and like making alcohol, but it's a very separate thing. It's an independent thing altogether. They work together, but it is not the same thing at all. So koji is what is used in order to create sugar in rice. We have starch already, and in order to get that, break the bonds of the starch molecule into sugar, into glucose molecules, we use koji, right? And there's different types. There's yellow koji, which is mostly used for sake making. There's black koji, and then there's also white koji. White koji is super trendy. There's Aramasa who made it trendy. And then there's also other people who are using it to get a different kind of acidity. Citric acid doesn't appear in sake very often, especially with yellow koji. But with white koji, we can get that like bright lemony zestiness. But yeah, yellow koji is the most used. Black koji gets used for shochu, and white as well. So parallel fermentation is sometimes called multiple parallel fermentation, but same. It's the combination of starch to sugar and sugar to alcohol happening in your production, in your fermentation at the same time in parallel, which is why we call it multiple or parallel fermentation. And this is one of the reasons, a huge reason why sake can be 22-23% alcohol, because as we're creating sugar, that sugar is becoming alcohol with yeast. It does this very slowly, very incrementally in small steps. And that's why the yeast never has time to really realize that the alcohol is going up. Right? With wine, the alcohol goes up to 14 degrees or 15, probably not 15, hey? Maybe like a super hot cab from Napa. Anyways, yeah, you wouldn't get to 15% alcohol with wine very, very easily. But with sake, you can quite readily. So this is one of the things. And the math is usually that you're making 2 sugars so that your yeast is never suffering. You don't want to give it too much sugar, but you can't let it suffer too much. Right? And that's this balance that brewers are really mapping out and planning. And that's really amazing too. Like there's so much data and graphs in breweries. It's amazing, and they've got like upwards of like 100 tanks often at craft breweries, right, going in different stages. So it's this huge project management scheme to manage all of that. So koji, Aspergillus oryzae, it's a national fungus. It's Japan's official fungus. And koji kind of covers everything, right? White koji, black koji, yellow koji. Aspergillus oryzae is specifically yellow koji, but all of this, like koji in general, is extremely important when we're talking about miso, mirin, soy sauce. And in fact, a lot of breweries started off making mirin or soy sauce or miso, and then they started making sake, which makes a lot of sense because they were already familiar with using koji of different types, fermentation in itself, and then they went into making sake. Fun fact is that the National Taxation Office was heavily invested in making sake, right? And the reason was because they could tax people, the companies for it, and they also helped to advance sake brewing technology because, again, if brewers were more successful and just better at brewing, then they would be able to make money. It's a very kind of corrupt, seemingly system. But even in breweries now, some of them have kept these like special rooms that the tax officers would come in, and they were called like sensei, like teachers. They were held in like really high regard, still are. Koji, we talk about it kind of all together, and we use this one word. But if we say koji king or the koji spores, then we're talking specifically about this like green powder that's used to sprinkle into the sake rice or to the koji rice, and that starts to break down the starches into sugars, right? But we also call just koji, we also just say koji when we're talking about the finished koji, which means the rice has this grown on it, monitored, and 48 hours later you have koji. This is Matsumoto-san again, heating in the middle, and these are koji boxes. they're called like they're called lids, and different breweries have different sizes, different ways of using them. You can also see, I think if you look close enough, there's like little lines in the koji boxes. You see that, like in the wood there, there's notches,
Yeah.
and that's so that there's like a little partition, and they move it to make the surface area bigger or smaller, right? So
Ah,
yeah, it's like a box that can change the size. So you start out small with a partition like here, and then that way the temperature stays is at the beginning is warm, and then as it grows and creates more energy and more heat, that's when you move it to more to make it bigger, and you have a bigger surface area,
hmm.
right? And that's how they control the temperature and the growth of the koji. Of course, a lot of breweries that are big would not be doing this by hand. They'd be doing it in a machine, like a conveyor belt type thing. Like with anything, if you scale it, chances are there's less human interaction. Funny, Hakkai-san, which is sake number one again, is quite large, but they pride themselves on, even for their sushi and the honjozo, to hand make the koji there. This is Oni-san from Kiyasho Brewery from Jikon. He's quite the famous sake maker, but just as humble, super lovely person. He always like reacts to my Instagram, which makes me really feel like giddy. I'm like, oh,
I know that
like,
feeling.
yeah, because I posted about like me wearing this like full leather shirt and cutting fish, and he sent
Yesterday.
an emoji, and I'm like, oh wow, and he's like, yeah, you do look like Yakuza. I was like, thank you. But yeah, so you can see that in his hand is this little shaker, and you see the green spores, right? So actually, I don't think I took it. I think Danielle took it, but it's a pretty good action shot of the koji spores being sprinkled onto this steamed rice. In this room, as you can see, it's like wooden walls, sigi, most likely Japanese cedar, and the temperature and the humidity is really tightly controlled. And you can't see in this photo, but the table would have like a what's it called, like a scale system, so you could see how much moisture has left and like how much heavier it is or lighter it is, right? There's also like thermometers in the rice. Even if they use like their senses to know if it's hotter or colder, they would still use technology, at least like a thermometer, in order to make sure that they're on track, right? But this is usually a 48-hour process, give or take. And it's very so important that every single brewer, no matter where you go in the world, would agree that the number one most important thing for sake making is koji. So there's this like tenet, yeah. Number one, koji. Number two, shubo. Number three, fermentation. That's the order of how important things are, right? But making the right koji for the kind of sake that they want to make is the blueprint, is really the design of that fermentation journey that they want. So if you're making a daiginjo versus a junmai, you're going to be adjusting your koji making to fit that. And so brewers often say that if they tasted another brewer's koji, they understand what kind of sake that's meant to be. What's interesting is sake number four tonight, Matsumoto. His koji making is really robust, and if you tasted the koji, it would be quite sweet. But his sakes are not sweet; they're like quite lean and quite not fat, not rich at all. And that's his control in the actual fermentation process. So that's not a that's not a good generalization, maybe, but it stands usually most of the time. And this is more koji. Different styles of koji making require different processes. What Oni-san here on the right is showing us is this is his ultra secret koji machine that I'm showing everybody. But this is only used for part of the koji making. So what was done like in the picture before, that step maybe he does by hand for some sakes, and then it takes a few hours in this machine as well. And not just because because like the young generation is lazy, but in general, people don't want, it's not a good working environment to have to wake up every 2 hours and to move things around physically. So the working environment in sake breweries is really changing for the better, I think. Some places still insist on like carrying everything by hand and doing push-ups in the middle. But for the most part, brewers are like, no, you should be able to sleep 7 hours and then go back to work. You don't, so we're going to use some technology when it makes sense to do so, right? And then also use human intuition and experience. In the middle here is a picture of some koji spores. This is a koji, was taken at a koji company's office, and they only supply koji to sake brewers, to miso, to mirin, just basically all things fermentation is who they cater to. And you can get, what's it called? Not pamphlets, but you can get brochures where you go through and it lists all the different kojis that you can choose from. I really wanted a copy of it. Like, you can look on our website, but it's, yeah, you can choose. I want this kind of amino acid level. I want this kind of, glutamic acid. So I'm going to choose this. Or you can get them to make your own custom blend. So you know how you can make like custom perfume now? You can ask them to make your custom blend of koji. Pretty cool. And yeah, you can do automated, you can do handmade, and everything in between. And most brewers would use a combination of them, especially nowadays. Another photo of a koji room. This is from, where is this? I can't quite remember, but again, about 48 hours is how long it takes to get your koji finished. Oh, in this picture, you can see like this like Reiki looking thing on the wall. And that's it kind of looks like when you see a Japanese garden, they're drawing lines in the pebbles. But this is to even out your, like the depth of the koji, of the rice itself. Yeah. Less or more, if you have less than 48 hours or the lower end of the scale, then most likely you're trying to make a koji that doesn't create as much sugar. Whereas if you do it longer, you want a stronger koji. That means more sugar, and that means more fermentation usually. Sohaze is the really strong koji. That's what it's called. And Tsukihaze is very light koji. So just as an extreme example, if you're making a thick, rich, sweet junmai, then you probably would use sohaze. Whereas if you're making a very clean, elegant sake, a daiginjo maybe, then you might use Tsukihaze. But it's very much all about what we're trying to make rather than what's better or worse. It's all about what you're trying to do. You can see in the picture on the left, that's steamed rice. So there's nothing on it. It's just sake rice or table rice that's been steamed. And you can see it kind of looks a little like crunchier or drier than probably what's in your rice cooker. Yeah, so the goal here is to make this middle soft and kind of gummy, they say, whereas the outside, you want it to be a little drier, right? Because koji is a mold, and we're creating enzymes over time, but mold itself likes moisture and humidity. Not moisture, no, that's the same thing. Moisture and temperature, warm temperatures, right? And so if you have it too wet, then the mold is going to grow too fast. And so this is a way of controlling that process. And on the right, this is finished koji. So the rice that has been steamed with the koji that's been grown on it. And it's a little fuzzy and like, it looks crumbly. And if you squished it, it would become powder. And that's how you know that the starches are starting to break down into sugars. If you taste it, it tastes like chestnuts is the easiest example. If you ever get those like peeled roasted chestnuts from Dandy Pack, that's kind of what it tastes like and smells like. Okay. So brewing in 2 slides. In 2 slides, I'm going to go through fermentation, brewing very quickly, and we cover a lot of these parts more in depth later on. So don't get too caught up in trying to like take notes. Or I was actually surprised how many people were taking notes, eh?
Everyone takes notes.
Really? I am
Even
so
wine coaches, everyone's got notebooks. It's good. Which do your own process.
yeah.
But I'd be like, if I'm not on screen, if I'm not getting tested, there's nothing.
Yeah. Well, I guess different learners too, different
Yeah,
styles.
exactly right.
Cool. Yeah, a lot of people are very studious. They were probably much better students than I ever was. This is a photo of Sato-san in at the bottom there. This is Aramasa, and he is extremely famous as well. He makes kimoto sakes, but doesn't call them anything. Only local rice. Anyways, this is his tank room, and it's all made with cedar, Japanese cedar. And there's one craftsman who can still make these cedar barrels in Japan now, in Osaka, and he is so popular because of Aramasa now that I think he's taking apprentice positions. But like to learn how to make this, it takes a long time, right? So everyone's worried that there's not going to be a barrel industry anymore. Yeah, so he's all about like back to basics. This right, so I've split it into three here. Rice preparation is the grouping of all the things you do to your rice, right? Your ingredient list being rice, whether it's table rice or sake rice. You would either polish it yourself or most likely get it polished, and then you would need to wash it, soak it, steam it, and this all gets grouped into rice prep, right? um, when you cook rice at home, if you wash it well and then you drain it and then you soak it, it does taste a lot better, like my mom said, but I never believed her. But now I know that she was right all along. But unlike cooking rice at home, where you put your your rice into water, where you submerge it, with sake making, you did not do that with the rice, right? So it's steamed. We use dry steam in order to cook the rice, and it never sees actual liquid water. Okay. Koji making, we talked about this a little bit before. So it's creating the fuel that takes us to the finish line, is the way that I think someone explained to me once. And it's all about where you want to go and how I'm going to get there. So if you don't have enough koji, or you don't have enough power in your koji to get you to cross that finish line, then you're going to have an incomplete fermentation, right? Like with anything. Sometimes winemakers will say this barrel stopped and now I have like weird residual sugar, but I think it's tasty, so I'm going to sell it. That's the kind of thing that might happen if you don't have the right, yeah. So the starter, this is a really important part. Again, brewers say that the fermentation starter is like the second most important part of the fermentation process. And in this step, we use a smaller tank in order to control the fermentation process a little better. And this is where the yeast is added, right? There are varieties, there are styles of sake where they're not adding yeast, but the vast majority of sake does use commercially available yeast, and that's what is added. And it's only added here at this starter stage because the whole goal at this point is to get a healthy yeast population. If we don't have enough yeast, like when you make I don't bake actually, but when you get powdered yeast, put it into water with a little sugar, that's kind of what we're doing with this whole starter process. Yeah. You use warm milk or warm water, you get a little sugar because it feeds off of it, and this warmness helps the fermentation process. And if it's not bubbling, your yeast is not working. But that's what we're doing with this starter stage. Okay. Rice steamer at Kiyosho, so at Jikon on the left here. You can see it's pretty like hand done. It's shoveling by hand. It's a lot of work, which is why again some machines like the one on the picture on the right from Tanguma, you can see the crane lifting the layers of rice, and it looks kind of like a dim sum steamer where you have different layers of rice in each place. At the very bottom, that's where the wettest steam is, and so the least like premium rice goes there because it can take, if it's less polished, or you don't care about it as much, then that layer can take the moisture and the heat better. Whereas at the top, you probably have like daiginjo 50% at the top, so that you're really pinpointing the moisture levels and the steaming process. Brewing, so fermentation, pressing, and then all things post-production. Fermentation, we're talking about the main fermentation. The ingredients are divided into 3 additions. This is something that brewers in Japan figured out hundreds of years ago, that if you add all your rice, all your ingredients at once, you're going to basically stress out the yeast, you're going to stress out the koji, it dilutes the whole tank, and you might not have as stable of a fermentation compared to adding it in 3 additions. So, whether you're making meringues at home and you want to add your egg whites very slowly into the rest of your, what do you add? If you're adding sugar to your egg whites, right? Yeah. So you do that in stages, or else if you add everything all at once, you're going to deflate your egg whites, and then you have plat souffle or whatever you're making. But by dividing it, we have this very safe method, safe way. Pretty incredible that they did this, over trial and error hundreds of years ago. Pressing, this is sometimes called filtration, or often called filtration. It's a little misleading maybe, because filtration, you can do things like charcoal filtering, or you can filter with like membranes and different machinery. But the whole point of this step is to take out the solids from the liquid, right? So we have this mash, you can see even in this photo, it's just like porridgey. Now I'm using the word porridge a lot. This porridgey mash where we have the rice solid still. Even after we were done all the fermentation, there is still a decent amount of rice solids. So if you've had nigori sakes, or like really nigori sakes, then they're going to be quite chunky. And they started off, like all sake starts off as like cloudy, chunky sake, right? And it takes work to get to a clear or somewhat clear state. But the pressing process is all about taking away the solids as much as you want from the sake itself. Post-production, there's so many things you can do after that kind of get not like ignored, but we don't talk about it as much. Maybe it's not as romantic. But actually, Nick from Miku said, oh, maybe it's kind of like oak, like secondary flavors that you get in wine from like the oaking process, or things you can do to it. That is kind of like for sake as well. So adding water, filtering, racking, aging. Maybe you also add bubbles to it, so you make sparkling sake. This all kind of counts in the post-production process. This is a sake pressing machine. So it's the most commonly used press that is used. And Yabuta is the name of the company that makes most of them. But that is not the only company, right? It's kind of like Kleenex, but and there's other players in the game now. And this lady in the photo, she's cleaning the sheets, and it's kind of, it looks like a horizontal press. Maybe that's the word I'd use, but we're not squishing from both sides. Each of these metal sheets, as you can see in this photo here, is almost a separate system in itself. So each of these metal pieces, they're usually covered by a rubber piece as well. And when the rubber inflates, it pushes to the sides into these metal structures, and you get sheets of sake kasu. So kasu is what, like, garbage. If you want to insult someone, you can call them kasu as well. Or if you say sake kasu, it's the solids in sake that you use for marinating and cooking. But the sake kasu gets trapped in between the sheets and the rubber layers, and that's how we make sheet kasu. Okay, and at the top here, you can see tubes. These are for air to come through to inflate the bladders that I'm talking about. And then the sake goes through these tubes that you can't quite see in here. but it's quite the work cleaning them. I've heard people say that if you're in here for like 8 hours a day, you come to hate that smell and just like want to throw up after you do it. Yeah, so you can imagine. You're just like taking a scraper and taking off this like mash, and that doesn't get thrown away. I'm sure some people have cooked or experimented with sake kasu. You can marinate, you can cook, you can eat it, like mix it with miso. There's so many things you can do, and it gets sold to kasu distributors. Matsumoto Brewery, you can see this is this main fermentation room. Very beautiful. Hopefully it stays that way. Okay. So what are the choices versus the law? So things that we have to do versus things that we can choose to do. The must-do steps: fermentation, filtration or pressing, and bottling. These are things that we have to do, right? To call our sake sake, we have to do all three of these things. But what is optional are style choices. So this is not about what we have to do, but what kind of sake do I want to make? Number one, adding alcohol, Jinmai versus Honjozo. We're going to taste this difference in the sake number 1 and 2. But whether we add alcohol or not determines whether it's Jinmai or Aruten added alcohol. And that gives us different texture, different mouthfeel, different kind of richness. Adding water is done usually to make the sake more palatable, right? So 18-19% is a little high, like it can be balanced, but sometimes it is quite big. So then you might add water to bring it down to like 13 to 15-ish, around there. But you can lower the alcohol. And then there's also this trend for a low alcohol genshu. Genshu meaning no water added. We can make styles of sake that finish the fermentation process at a lower percentage. Pasteurization, nama means, if it says nama, you kind of have to assume that it's unpasteurized. It's completely unpasteurized. It's raw. And then there's also once, twice, and depending on where you do the pasteurization, it can be called different things. And that's kind of how, that's a differentiation that I don't think is that important. Whether it's once or twice is kind of as far as I think we really need to talk about. So is anything surprising? Often nigori sake gets termed or coined unfiltered, right? So unfiltered sake is not sake at all. So it's a bit of a wordplay, maybe. But if you take your sake mash and bottle it, then that is not considered seishu. It's not legally classified as sake, but you can make doburoku. So we recently, for that site, we just imported the wuroku for the first time, and it's 8% alcohol and quite chunky and really like textured, as you can imagine. And that's the wuroku, right? It's low alcohol. It's meant to be drunk fresh, and that's what the brewery that told me you should add beer to it. So that is unfiltered. But everything else, all the other nigoris are going to be filtered to some amount. So whether that's roughly filtered or we make it clear and then add some leaves back in to make it very lightly cloudy, this is all possible, but still it's not unfiltered. They have to be pressed to some degree. This brewery in Kyoto that gave us a lecture was saying that because of this rule, they actually took like a sieve, dipped it into the sake, not a sieve, like it's a huge sieve, put it into the tank, and then pulled it up and said to the tax officer, look, we filtered it. It's now sake, right? Because I think non-seishu gets taxed higher. So they're like, no. You can tax us this lower amount because we did this, right? So there are ways to get around it. But it's that important that we talk about how it's not unfiltered sake. This slide you've seen really recently. I'm talking, the arrows are to show you when these choices are done. So adding alcohol or adding water, pasteurization, filtering, aging, which was post-production choices, the arrows are there to show you when it's done. So adding alcohol, right, is to not to fortify our sake, but to extract aromas and flavors. And in wine, if you talk about fortification, we're talking about like port and cherry and those things. So with sake, it is not fortification, but it is to extract aromas and flavors. And in fact, our alcohol percentage does not go higher because we add alcohol. It's a stylistic choice, right? So, and again, this whole arrow and here thing is to show you that it's done after fermentation, before pressing. So you can't do it anywhere else, right? In order to, again, be within the rules and the laws, we have to do it after the fermentation's done, and nowhere else. And this is where we're getting alcohol from, like distilled alcohol from like Brazil and other places where it's a little easier to distill because Japan has very difficult rules around distillation. And it's sugar cane based often, but some sort of grain based alcohol usually. And it gets added at around 30 degrees, 30% alcohol. And that's, it's not super high actually. But if anyone's looked on their perfume bottles or cologne bottles, you'll often see alcohol as an ingredient. That's to stabilize some of the aromas, right? If you get natural products, they often don't smell as strong or not as strong as long, right? And if you're like a cocktail guy, I know Harrison's the bar manager. If you're making extractions, then if you use wine, if you use sake, you don't get as much flavor to come out because your alcohol is not enough to get as much out. So the mishu, you can make it with sake, but you won't get as much intensity of the fruit compared to if you're using a spirit. All your bottled cocktails at Peter Panic, is there anything that it's all spirits, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and juices and stuff like that. Yeah.
But I mean, like, sorry, you wouldn't be using like wine because like wine cocktail. Anyways, yeah, that's a whole different thing. Sake or wine, the the amount, like the ability for lower alcohol to extract as much flavor, color, or even aromas is a lot less. Right. And then the whole adding water, pasteurizing, filtering, aging, it's done at the post-production stage. If you add anything besides water in any of your sake making, then it is now a liqueur. So if you're adding alcohol at this point at the end, then that's a liqueur, right? Like there's a kikusui producer in Niigata, I think. They make a nigori and it's like 23% alcohol. And it's really rich and like textured and I like it quite a bit, but it's like, oh, 23%, that's higher than what you need. And you realize it's added alcohol, actually. So that would have been probably done post-production and it's that is considered a liqueur. So what does it do? What do these things do? So when we add alcohol, we talked about this already, we get more aromas. So esters, we get more flavors. Esters are things that we smell. So I'm really excited about the cucumber chips, Nick.
Yeah.
The Chinese probably Lay's chips, the cucumber flavors.
Well, I remember that when we did it last time, you suggested cucumber sushi as a good pairing for these sakes. So I chose the cucumber chips.
So there must be, I wonder what the cucumber ester is like. So whoever was at Lay's Asia would have taken cucumber esters, like cucumber flavor, and put it into the chips in some way or form, right? And yeah, that's pretty cool. Like Japanese or Asian snacks and as a whole are pretty cool that way. So everything that we smell, esters are responsible for it naturally occurring or not. That's beside the point. But some esters, some aromas are only released with the addition of alcohol and not with sake alone. So this you get this like amplified nose sometimes, and you also get textural difference. You'll see in sake number 1 versus 2 that number 1 is more like It's more like creamier maybe, but it's also a little thinner, and it makes the sake often drier. You can kind of create a little bit of structure in an added alcohol style sake, with this like dryness and the sensation of alcohol. Again, it's a stylistic choice. It can be high-end sake, it can be ginjos, it can be daiginjos, it can be table sake, right? Adding water to make sake more palatable. Some people, I'm sure 20% alcohol is totally palatable, but to just kind of bring it down and smooth it out by adding a little water, you can kind of um, taste more things. Kind of like when you're tasting whiskey, maybe you add a little bit of water to make it not super concentrated, because sometimes that hurts, but that helps as well. There's this kind of conversation around, are we diluting? So if you add a little bit of water, even as you're tasting spirits or coffee or what else? Anyways, yeah, to those things, you can get this little bit of dilution and smell more, taste more, but also you can do it not very well, like with anything, and make it more watery and diluted. Heat is what is used for pasteurization. I'll show you some photos in a bit, whether we're using a hot water bath, like a shower, this like shower machine that showers the bottles with hot water and then cold water to cool it down. That's, I think, still the most modern machine that you can get for pasteurization. Okay, this is a really important topic. Sake, when it's first brewed, for the most part, it's going to taste pretty good. Like it'll be big and juicy, maybe, or like fat and rich, but they are pretty expressive right off the get go, right? But everything that we do afterwards, including like shipping it to Toronto or to Vancouver, it takes it all down, right? And like makes it change in a certain way. So, how we get the sake from Japan or elsewhere to your glass in the most ideal condition is like such a huge question, obviously, even within Japan. And when we look at photos later, you'll see that getting the temperature up is often easier, but then shocking it or cooling it down enough to preserve that freshness is an even bigger question, bigger problem. We can do things like also charcoal filtration, and adding charcoal to sake doesn't have to be all about mass produced, like boring, shitty sakes. It can be just enough done well to kind of clean up the sake, to take out some of the roughness. But if you do it a lot, you can definitely make it taste like nothing. So ironically, Niigata sakes, some of the like really, really big production mass facilities actually make sakes that are really flavorful, just so that they can thin it out again by taking out flavor, watering it down, and like pasteurizing it a bunch, well, twice. So it's an interesting conversation about like it can be used for evil or for good, but it depends on how you do it. The picture in the middle here is from Izumi. It's a brewery in Toronto. You can see that the bottles are all lined up in this bath, and they're filling it up with water. And there's a spout on the corner where steam goes into, and then it gets heated so that the bottle that's the farthest away from the heat source becomes 65 degrees Celsius inside. So that's a magic number that all brewers are trying to get the sakes up to, because at that temperature, our enzymes and our yeast become inactive or like dormant, and then you don't have like things happening in your bottles that you don't want. Right. And then cooling it down after that once or twice for pasteurization is how we keep the flavors intact. The picture on the left, you can see the fresh sake. It's not water white. No sake starts off as water white. It has to be treated in order to make it very, very like no color or close to it. So this greenish, like yellowish color is the natural state. And then on the far right is a canned fish pasteurizing machine that one of the brewers we visited said she found at a trade show maybe, and thought, let's use this for sake pasteurization. It's a pretty good idea, I feel like.
Yeah.
Tasting sake. Okay, so I'm sure everyone's thirsty if you haven't already started drinking the sakes. I hope you have some left because that would be a shame. But I'm gonna go get water. But so this is your chance to go get your pouches and your glass and spittoons or snacks, whatever. I'll be back. You want to change? So I know that you've got, I think everyone's got 8 pouches tonight, but I said in the email which 4 we'll be tasting tonight. And so again, it's the Hakkai-san, Tokubetsu Honjozo, and then Shida, and then the Gassan, and the Matsumoto, if you can get those out. And you can go ahead and pour the first sake, which is the Hakkai-san Tokubetsu Honjozo, into your glass. You don't have to pour everything in. Like you can save some for later or tomorrow or whenever. You can certainly drink it all though. These pouches have been quite reliable, so I think you can keep them for a while. Oh no. What was the oh no?
Yeah. Hakkai-san.
Yeah, Hakkai-san, then Shida, the green one, then the pink one, and then Matsumoto. No. I think you're the person who like you influence everyone though, no? Because like these pouches have become like the hot item.
It's so wonderful that this has brought about this renaissance of samples that aren't about glass jars and glass vials. And
I know, and it's so much lighter, and they're recyclable.
Yeah.
If pouch makers,
I tell people that. Maybe.
Well, the paper ones are discontinued now, but I had a phone call from a friend in Vancouver today being like, hey, those pouches, where'd you get them? I'm like, okay, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Okay. When we are tasting sake, we're looking for the same things that we are looking for when we taste anything, right? And that is balance. It's for what we like. It's for context. We can get really technical. Some people do, if they're tasting competitively or judging for technical flaws and things like that. I know you do that, Nick, a lot with wine, right? Like,
yeah.
Do you find has that helped with sake tasting or like completely different? But you probably bring that to the sake itself, right? Actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the one thing I probably need to start learning is like tasting sake in different vessels that aren't just wine glasses, because my whole behavior is trained around observing wine through a wine glass. But I do notice there's differences, definitely in terms of using different vessels to get different flavors. And I'm definitely not like so snobby to say the wine glass is the only way to taste it, but my brain uses these actions to like click into gear. So
it's like a little bit of like a ritual, I guess, or system.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. So different schools of wine or sake, they all have different systems, and I think what I've tried to do is to put it into this summary and to also not be super technical, because that's not what we're doing here. But yeah, like if you're using a wine glass, what that does at least I think is to standardize it so that you're tasting. But you don't have to do that tonight either. But I would say maybe if you have like 4 different glasses for 4 different sakes, that might be kind of harder to compare, right? So I would use the same vessel if you can, or similar sizes and shapes. That's all that we say. There's a competition in Japan called wine sake that tastes good in wine glasses. So there's like stickers now that say like this won silver or gold at this like sake that tastes good in wine glass awards. It always makes me giggle. Oh, you're using ochoko too. You see a different? Is it the same sake?
Yeah, it's the same sake. These were in like my fancy cupboard. You know, where you fancy glasses and your fancy mugs that you buy.
Grandma covered.
Yeah, and I finally fished them out.
Nice. Yeah, so if anyone's using non-wine glasses, let me know. Okay, but appearance, aroma, and palate. For anything that you're tasting, again, spirits, cocktails, wine, coffee, sake, we're looking at these 3 aspects, right? And there's different terminology sometimes, but these are the things that we're looking at. Appearance for sake tells us a lot of things, but I'd say comparatively not as much as what wine appearance tells you. So, different shades of red, different shades of like white wine. Though there's not as much of a spectrum for appearance on sake. So there's like straw yellow, pale yellow. There's like water white. So if you're getting a sake that is water white, which means it's like super clear, you can see everything through it, then that's what people would say is water white. Right. And that will tell you some things like most likely it's been charcoal filtered a lot, perhaps, or that it has some age, or maybe it just hasn't been very like manipulated after the pressing. The color itself, how much color there is, the clarity, if there's bubbles or not, if there's nigori, if it's cloudy sake or not, those are things that you can all kind of take note. I'm not classy. So coffee mug, yeah, it would be Simon. Yeah, I think you should ask your sister for wine glasses for Christmas then, or not, just use the coffee mug. My grandfather used to have this like huge ass tea mug that he would use for everything, mostly for alcohol. But yeah, you can use anything. Otokoyama sake glass, well, that's fancy. Oh, okay. So parents, we're looking at it, right? I think if you poured the first sake into your glass, then my rim's kind of yellowish, but I think it's pretty close to water white. It has very little color, if anything. And then aroma, I'm sure people have seen other people, or you've done it yourself, swirl, whether it's a coffee cup or mug or ochoko or wine glass, you want to put your nose in to smell it. The ochokos and cups, when we talk about service or how to drink sake in week 4, we cover like why there's different shapes and different like tasting cups in Japan even, but you still like, even if you can't swirl fully, you're still trying to smell it, right? Aroma intensity, and then the characteristics of that aroma. Cereal lactic fruity is in some combination in sake usually. Cereal, again, being like porridge, cooked rice, what else? Cereal, probably smell cereal. Fruity aromas. If you get melon, banana, pineapple, these are all go into this camp of ginjo notes. And when we talk about ginjo later, or when we taste ginjo sake number 3, you'll see that there is a very specific set of aromas and flavors that you're going to get. So ginjo is not just about fermentation or the polish, it's about the kind of sake you're going to make. So you can get a ginjo sake that's polished is 60%, which is what's allowed for ginjo sakes at a minimum, but they could be a full, like a super salty umami bomb sake. Right? So ginjo notes, we're talking specifically about melon, banana, pineapple, licorice, lychee. Those are what we say grouped together as that. And on the palate, flavor intensity. So how much of that flavor is there? Flavor characteristics, hopefully what you smell and what you taste are kind of in line or close enough to it, right? And then things like sweetness, how sweet is it, how acidic, what's the finish like, is it short, do you keep on tasting it, how complex. And complexity is a really tough word to define, right? Which is why this phrase I think exists. But this like layers, depth, we know what simplicity is, so it's the opposite of that. The length as well. Okay, so the first sake to start the night, the tasting portion, is the Hakkai-san Tokubetsu Honjozo. And Hakkai-san, thank you for this great map, Nick. I like the background here. So this, the first sake is right in this middle part facing the Sea of Japan side. It is a very famous place for sake. Niigata styles have a specific way of being, and they're usually tande karakuchi, which means like dry, light, and crisp. So you don't get a lot of like big sakes in Niigata, right? It's just like they're more about clean, really crushable, and very humble food. So you get fish, you get farming, a lot of like forage stuff. It's not about like big crab or anything. It's more about like what like humble farmers and fishermen can forage and have on a daily basis. Very healthy too. So the sakes from this region are like really drinkable, light, clean. There's a lot of snow here as well, so that affects kind of the people and the landscape altogether. This is a honjozo, and we'll talk about tokubetsu a little later on, but tokubetsu just means that sake has something a little extra. In this case, it's a little extra polish. We'll go over the specific polishes later next week, but this is 55% polish. And if you recall, or you know, honjozo being 70% minimum, and then added alcohol, right? So that sake number 1 and 2, if you have another glass or you've already moved on to sake number 2, you can compare the honjozo added alcohol style or texture, and then shida, the sake number 2, the junmai-ness of it. Right. So honjozo, the added alcohol, is a little lighter on its feet. It's a little thinner, but you get a lot of aromas, but just not like deep, you know, like even on the palate, that sharpness I think comes more from the alcohol and the structure that comes from that, rather than like acidity that's brewed in the sake.
Would you say honjozos tend to be like a more everyday style of sake?
Yeah, that's I think very true. I think it's something that you can
like the implication is that you should just like
you should drink it, like you should drink a lot of it. You know, you can, it's light and it's easy. It's like drinking, I don't know, like a pilsner, or what's wine equivalent, like, you know, you're like, I don't know, Pinot Grigio is not the right word, but like your easy white wine, your Vino Verde, I don't know, that sort of position, right? Yeah, but tokubetsu is honjozo, so 55% is pretty low in terms of honjozo. Hakkai-san, they're all about like giving you more than what they need to. So they're like Sushu, their table sake, I think is 60% polish, and that's pretty polished for a table sake. Gohyaku Nangoku rice is what they use for the koji rice, and then this todoroki wase, which is table rice, local rice, is for the rest of the additions. This is yeast number 7, which we will talk more about later. Okay, so this is Hakkai-san, the honjozo, that I would really want you to taste that difference in texture and depth. Then the second sake is this shida junmai. Okay, and this is from Saga now. It's from the very southern prefecture. So at the bottom here in Kyushu, and the Kyushu, I think a lot of people associate it with shochu, with spirits, but there's actually quite a few sake breweries down there too. And that's because there's so much access to great farmland and ocean. So you have good produce, you have good rice, you have good fish. And this is the route that people, like historians say, that rice cultivation came from, like China, Korea, then down, and then into Kyushu, to Japan. Yeah. The Shida means seven farms. This is a junmai, and it's muroka, which means it's no charcoal filtering. Yamada Nishiki rice for the koji rice, and then Neho for the kake. And this is 65%. Yeah, it's really juicy.
I haven't even tasted it, and I love it.
Yeah, the green, like, it smells green. Like green fruit, green melon, not so much green apple, but really kind of fresh and fruity. And this is just a junmai, right? We're talking about fruits that are kind of ginjo-esque. Do you like it?
I like it a lot.
Yeah, that's really. But then, even though it's pretty and fresh, especially on the finish, I think it's a little sharper. There's more acidity, but more glutamic acid as well, and just like a deeper, fuller sake. And that's the difference between the adding alcohol and the not. So junmai, pure rice, we're not adding alcohol. So the first one is about getting those kind of like brighter, sharper tones, getting some of the esters out, the riciness. And it's just like so easy drinking. Whereas this Shida junmai is a little fatter. But this style of junmai, where we're seeing more polish, more finesse, is really the kind of the direction that the sake industry has been going for a while, right? There's so many junmais, like even the sharaku that we had yesterday, that yesterday, that are just like pretty. And junmais just aren't all about like earthy, caramely richness. No. Okay, so that's from down here. This brewery makes a pretty big range of sakes. So like another one that they make is aged for a few years and really big and like fat and rich. And it's not a class about originality, but definitely you do see, I think, even in these two sakes we just had, that Hakkai-san Niigata style of clean, crisp, light, and then the south in the Kyushu area where it's more about flavor. And they're eating totally different things, right? Like in Saga, the ramen is like very porky, like a lot of pork broth. And then in Niigata, they're eating like foraged spring vegetables. I think that's closer to Vancouver in feel. Okay. Then the third sake is Gassan. And Gassan, the characters mean like moon and mountain, but it's the name of a mountain, one of the top 3 mountains in Yamagata Prefecture. And this is their junmai ginjo.
It's on the map. All the mountains.
Oh yeah, I remember you said that. You added the three mountains. Yeah.
Hakko-san is a mountain, and the real name of the Shida is the name of the mountain. It's all very mountain related. These first 3 stuff.
Yeah. It's very interesting that way. They talk about the mountain in Yamagata, and then, but I think the breweries. Anyways, yeah. So Gassan is the mountain, and then they talk about the rice. They said the rice is sake rice, so I just left it at sake rice. The polish is 60%. So this is our ginjo example. You can smell that it's a little more confected.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, this is ginjo. It's also yeast 1801, and that's a very modern yeast. It's one of the most aromatic ones out there that you can use. And O1 just makes the yeast not foam and destroy your fermentation, or like not destroy. It makes you have to clean up if you have a lot of foam. But this is, I get this like, it kind of makes my teeth hurt, I have to say. Like the side here, I'm just like, oh, but it's very estery.
Has it like candy floss? What do you call it? We call it fairy floss, but I don't think that's what you call it.
That's nice. Oh my god, it's cotton candy.
Cotton candy.
Ooh, that's nice. Yeah, it's fruity.
That's really cool.
I might not drink like a whole bottle. I think I could actually if I needed to. That's the thing.
We twisted your arm.
Yeah. You can see that this like ginjo aromas, like more floral, more fruity, a little more confected. This is, the yeast is a huge part of this sake, but definitely you get this ginjo nest. 60%, that's the number that we need if you're going to call it a ginjo. But more importantly than that is this style, right? This like floral, fruity. And this sake, it's like kind of sharp at the beginning, but there's actually very little acid, because this yeast gives like a lot of those notes of like the aromas, but doesn't produce a lot of acidity. And so you choose kind of what you want when you choose yeast, like specifically like this.
Yeah, it finishes very different. It doesn't have that bitterness and that textural quality that the other sakes had, I think.
Yeah.
It didn't linger as much. It finishes very clean.
It does, yeah.
That's really cool.
That's available in Toronto as well, actually. Izumo, yeah. They made it pink apparently because the Izumo shrine, they have these like, they have these charms they can get if you want to be if you want to find the love of your life. You go to this shrine and you get these like charms, and all over Japan there's like temples and shrines that sell these things, right? And they all have the different like mythology. So they made it pink for that, and I was like, oh, I don't know about that one.
Yeah.
It's sake though.
That's cute though.
Yeah. This one tastes like soju. Oh, I wonder. So I'm not that familiar with soju, but I feel like this kind of reminds me of maybe the soju because it's like sharper and maybe you taste the alcohol a little more. Yeah. Okay. Sweet and a burn. Yeah, I can see that. Like some of those, what is it, like grapefruit or grape flavored sojus are pretty estery, sure. And in the fourth sake, this is Matsumoto-san's Shuhari Yamada Nishiki. And he was in the photo with quite a few photos. He's very photogenic, so we've used him in a few places. But the one with the well, and then the one where he's in the koji room. This is Yamada Nishiki rice from Kyoto, from Fushimi, and I am telling you that it's 50% polished, but he doesn't really care to let you know. So this is all about the rice and this like holistic, comprehensive look at the sake, rather than saying it's Junmai Daiginjo. So in fact, it doesn't say that on the bottle anywhere, right? It's Junmai, it's Yamada Nishiki rice, and we know that it's 50% polished, but he doesn't call it Daiginjo. And I wanted to put a sake in here that is more about what this generation is doing in terms of kind of saying, we respect where we came from and what our ancestors and even our like parents were doing up until really recently, but we also want to move away from that. So Shuhari, the characters the first character for Shu is to protect, and Hari is to break and to like remove yourself from that. So in order to protect tradition, we also need to reinterpret and to like adapt to the times, right? Not to say that you lose sight of what you're doing, but to translate it into a different generation. So this is declassified, undeclared. He won't give you like the acid levels. He won't give you alcohol level. So he gives you alcohol, but not the Nihonshu though, the sake meter value, which tells you like how dry it is. He won't give you the amino acid levels. He won't give you like acid levels either. It's like, why do you need to know that? Yeah.
That's really delicious. I love this. I love this sake so much.
Yeah, you've had I've like chosen it a few times. Sorry, you've had to repeat some.
No, this is like, I guess this is kind of like one of the first sakes I put at Peter Pan, my restaurant, that I like reordered. I don't know, that doesn't sound very significant, but it is. It's like the last bottle sold, and I was like, I've got to keep this because it's for wine people. It has who don't drink a lot of sake. This is a very dynamic, very challenging sake that speaks to the modernity and the new era, and I think people can appreciate that. And it has a spritz. It's has a completely different texture, you know. And it's Yamada Nishiki, right? So like the most popular, the most, you know,
iconic, brand.
Iconic, and it shows that it isn't just Daikinjos that Yamada Nishiki makes. It's capable, you know. It's a cool story.
Yeah, and he's really translating like he's visiting farms and saying, why does this rice behave this way this year, but now when he goes to the farm, he goes, oh, okay, so during harvest it was raining really hard, this is probably why. So and he's visiting people that his dad wouldn't have really known back in the day. A couple questions came up. So I think Yumi said, how can we find out about yeast numbers? Yeah, some websites definitely don't tell you very much. Sometimes we have to do a little digging. Yeah, if you do read Japanese websites, they can tell you a little more sometimes. But it's often hard. And the nature of it is also that it's cool to know, but sometimes it's also like, it doesn't add much to my experience either, or to my understanding of it. So if I can't find it, I just kind of ignore it as well. And yes, this is brewed with soft water. So shimi is soft water, and like kind of. It was said that if you use soft water, you make soft sake. They still say like feminine sake or onna sake, which is kind of frustrating. Anyways, but they would say like soft feminine sake from Kyoto Fushimi, and then like masculine sake, hard sake from Hyogo. But this is soft water, yes, technically, but the way that he brews and he ferments, you get this acidity and brightness and effervescence. He loves champagne, and you can kind of see that like that in there. Like champagne, you have grapes that don't ripen super, to a high degree. And this sake too, he makes the koji to be strong, but he doesn't let it ferment very hard, so you don't get very much glucose in the sake. Like, I think that's champagne. You have the bubbles, you have the acidity, and then you have the structure. And I think that this is where this kind of connection comes in again. Also because I know he drinks a lot of champagne. No. Okay.
And so he should.
Yeah. A little family feud at this brewery, so he's not here anymore. He's looking for a new home. He's calling his time off right now after his battle with his cousins and other family members as his samurai training. I'm not quite sure if I like this branding, but anyways, he's working right now. He just released his sake with Shihonyari. Tomita-san's a good friend of his, but he's going to, I think, like 4 or 5 different breweries. He's going to make, I think he's going to do something with Jikon as well. Probably Senking. Anyways, he's on the road. He's like a samurai without a home. Knowing? Yeah. Those are the vibes he's putting out there. But yeah. So if you see Matsumoto, it's definitely his sakes that we brought in, but he's not at the brewery as of December 2020. And that's in Kyoto right there. I'm sure a lot of people here have gone to Japan, I feel like. So what is ginjo? We tasted sake number 3, and everyone was talking about, I think, the fruitiness and maybe the like sharpness of the aromas. Ginjo, the characters, jo is the character for fermentation, and then ging is to is to examine something to really elevate. I think maybe that be the word. So it's kind of a not abstract, but it's a little like airy of a word. But they came up with this structure for categorizing sake again in the late early 2000s or late 90s. So it is fairly new, right? Polish for ginjo is only one part of the equation. So it does need to be polished to 60% or less if you want to call it ginjo. But more than that, it better be ginjo aromas, right? So if you smell a sake that's fruity, apple, pear, melon, pineapple, banana, if you smell those notes, but it doesn't say ginjo on it, it's still fine. They might call it a jinmai or a tokubetsu jinmai, and it's just giving ginjo aromas. So ginjo ka, the ka meaning smell or aromas. You can say, oh, this has a lot of ginjo ka, but it's not a ginjo. And how do we make this style? There's a lot that goes on in this process. Izumi, when I tried one of their ginjo sakes, I think they made 2 years ago here in Toronto. They said that it was harder than they thought because the fermentation for ginjo making needs to be really controlled to a T, right? Temperature is a huge part of it. Using the right yeast, of course, but those two alone, that's not enough often, right? So what they found as a result of that test was that the fermentation got really fast, and then they end up with like an extremely dry sake, right? Because there's like hardly any residual sugar left. But it just shows you that even for a brewery that has been making sake for 10 years, it's not an easy process. So rice selection, if you have a rice that melts really well and it's super soft, that's not really conducive to ginjo making, because the whole goal with ginjo making is that you like really stretch out the fermentation at low temperatures to make not super sweet sakes, but you need the flavors to come through. You don't want too much of it. You want the aromas to be there. It's a lot of things that have to line up. Polishing choice and rice selection. I already said the rice. Polishing choice, if you polish 60 versus 40, they can both be called ginjos, but they're going to behave differently in the fermentation. Even things like how long to soak the rice for, what kind of koji to make, those are really important in choosing to make ginjo. Fermentation, cold temperatures, and ginjo yeast is the combination that we need. If you're making a pilsner, then you need pilsner yeast or lager yeast, and you need a cold temperature fermentation, right? And in the same way, we have to work backwards and say, this is the kind of sake I want to make, but how do I get there? Ginjo yeast. So yeast number 1801 for Gasan is certainly a ginjo yeast. The most popular ginjo yeast is yeast number 9, which we'll taste, I think, somewhere in week 3. And Shuhari Matsumoto, actually, his is yeast number 9, but it's his own version of it, so it's a little different. But ginjo yeasts are the yeast that we use in order to make those aromas. Oh, where did that come up? Is everything clear? Yeah.
Completely.
Oh, this is the wrong city. Oh no, I just thought that. Okay. So yeah, that's a lot of information, I think, at you in one day, in one session, but hopefully some things were new to you, some things were put in a different way. I hope you understand. Yeah. Any questions? Any thoughts?
What's everyone's favorite sake?
Yeah. So, I was pretty impressed with. Yeah.
The Shida was mine.
Yeah, Matsumoto Shida. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I think yeah, Shida was really tasty. Like it was light on it, but it's, like it had acidity. It was really well balanced. The Shuhari too was showing like that effervescence, and that was really nice. So he uses narrower tanks for the Shuhari, and you get those you get that like texture on the palate. And again, I'm impressed with these bags.
Yeah,
They
me
kept
too.
up. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And then Hakkai-san Honjozo. This is one of my first trips to New York. We went to Decibel, this great sake bar. And Miki, me, and Yuri drank a 1.8 liter after we drank like so many bottles before during dinner. That was a pretty rough trip. Yeah. But it's the kind of sake that my point being that it's the kind of sake that you can drink a lot of. Yeah, the Hakkai-san was your fave. Yeah, it's like not a like not in a bad way, but like an old man kind of sake where you just keep sipping it all the time. My grandfather would have. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we'll see you. Well, not hopefully you'll see me next week. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll see.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks.
No, thank you, Mariko. It was lovely to meet everyone. Weirdly.
If anyone has any questions, please DM me or email me. You have both, hopefully, by now. And yeah, see you next week. Good night.